part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Welcome back to another episode of the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast here on the Press Play Podcast Network. My name is Taylor Vanderbilt, and as always, I appreciate you tuning in to listen to me rant and ramble about my favorite sport, college basketball. First and foremost, I want to say shout out to Chase. If you guys listened to the quick episode that we had last week, he let everybody know I will now be releasing the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast here on the Cavs on the Break channel. So for you guys that are already subscribed, you don't have to do anything else different. Just hop on, listen, it'll come to your phone, just like Cavs on the Break. So as I say, we talk about college basketball on the show, but today we're going to switch it up. On today's show, we're going to dive into the NBA draft. To be more exact, we're going to discuss the 14 lottery picks. I'm going to give you who I think is going where and why. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the NBA Finals ended last night. We saw Steph Curry get championship number 4. I guess Draymond and Klay as well get championship number 4. Saw Steph get his first Finals MVP, which was well-deserved. But now we should shift our focus, and all I can personally think about is the NBA draft and who is going where, which is why it's always been so fun for me to make mock drafts. This year is a fun year, to me in particular, because there's so much good talent throughout this draft. With that being said, let's start with the last pick of this year's lottery, and one I feel that would be of interest to the listeners of this podcast and this channel, the Cleveland Cavaliers here at number 14. So this year the Cleveland Cavaliers had the 14th pick. After making it to the play-in, I feel like the next step for this team is actually making it into the playoffs, if you will. This team is young. They have very, very good potential to be very, very good in the future. I mean, if you look at the roster that Kobe Altman and the new GM Mike Gansey have to work with, they have a lot to work with. So starting at guard, you have Darius Garland, who's obviously one of the best young guards in the league. You pair him with a now healthy Caris LeVert, which I think he is, when healthy, one of the best wing scorers that we have in the NBA. To me, that's a backcourt I think any coach would love to have. So now shift to the front court. I think it's easy to see that the Cavs have it made here with a solid rotation of Lauri Markkanen, Mobley, Jared Allen. Obviously, that only covers the power forward and center positions. So if you're seeing where I'm going with this, it of course leaves the 3 spot open. For me, I think the pick here, and some Ohio people might love this, is Malachi Branham from Ohio State. Malachi is a 6'5" wing. Like I said, he's out of Ohio State. The thing I love about him the most is that he's the same size as a guy like Isaac Okoro, but he gives you a little bit more offensively. Now, I know what you're thinking, like, well, Okoro's a defensive guy. We got LeVert. We got Garland that can score. Markkanen can score. Mobley can get a shot. And that's all well and good, but you always want more wings that can score, especially in the NBA. So, and the one thing I love about Malachi is that he also has proved to be a strong and somewhat aggressive defender while in college. So I think when you pair that mindset of wanting to play defense with NBA coaching and the fact that he's athletic enough to guard pretty much, I would say, any guard position into the small forward area, I think he'll fit perfectly with their young core, and he'll be a great pickup. Someone who can give him some scoring from places that isn't the normal Garland, LeVert, Mobley, Allen type of deal. So with that being said, let's move on to pick number 13. And that is the Charlotte Hornets. So at pick 13, we have the Charlotte Hornets, who, just like the Cavs, have a very, very solid young core. For starters, you, of course, have LaMelo Ball, who has blossomed way more than I think most thought he would. And granted, he was the number 2 pick, so while we kind of, I guess, should have expected it, I still think he's exceeded expectations at this point during his time in the NBA. Looking at the rest of the roster, you have Terry Rozier, of course, at the 2 guard spot. So that gives you a nice little electric backcourt. And I love that any given time, LaMelo can go off or Terry can go off, and the other one kind of just supplements the other. So I think they've done a really good job of figuring that tandem out there in Charlotte. On top of this, the Hornets have a plethora of wings, like a plethora. So you have Kelly Oubre, Jaden McDaniels, even down to like Miles Bridges and PJ Washington, who I kind of consider in that tweener wing, stretch four, small stretch four kind of area, if you will. So that essentially just leaves, for me, the center spot. And that's personally where I think they should improve. I mean, you have Miles Plumlee. You have, Montrezl Harrell is going through some legal troubles right now. Mason Plumlee. I said Miles Plumlee. But you have Mason Plumlee, and you're going through some stuff with Harrell. So the center position is kind of wide open. And that's why I think the pick for me here at 13 is Mark Williams out of Duke. With Mark Williams, you get a guy who's 7 foot with a wingspan of 7'7". So he's protecting the rim. He's also very athletic and can rim run with the best of them. And I, as a Duke fan, I noticed that. And I'm not giving this pick because I'm a Duke fan. I just want to clarify. But I think he'd be a really good fit. He rim runs. LaMelo could have someone to outlet to. He'd be, it's a perfect fit for me. And then on top of that, as we mentioned before, he can defend the rim. He was one of the best defensive bigs in the nation last year. And I just think that would go a long way with this young Charlotte team. And the thing I think for me, the most important part, of this whole Mark Williams thing, is that he's developing a jumper. He has nice soft touch. He was a 70+% free throw shooter his last year in college, which is remarkable for someone that tall. His touch is nice. They showed in his pre-draft workouts him hitting threes and things of that nature. So definitely like Mark Williams here at 13. So here, next up at 12, we have the first of 2 picks here for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Obviously, they have the number 2 pick, and we'll get into that later. But I think this pick could be just as fruitful for them as that one. The Thunder obviously are clearly rebuilding, but Sam Presti is one of the best GMs in the NBA, and you can see that he's really starting to round this team into the shape and form that he really wants. Obviously, the key piece of all this is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is a tremendous, two-way, versatile PG. All-star games in his future, in my opinion. I personally think he's my favorite point guard of this kind of new generation of guys to watch. I think he can do it all. Him and DeJounte Murray are very similar in some ways. I think Shai can shoot a little better. But I love both of their games, but Shai's particularly. So you have him, and then you add in the likes of Josh Giddey, who really surprised me. I love overseas players, but I didn't know enough about Josh Giddey to, get the hype, if you will. But he certainly surprised me with how his game translated to the NBA. And I think also you throw in Lou Dort as well, who can give you scoring and defense. They aren't far away from having a good, a solid young core that can really start to make some waves. So to me, the biggest need for OKC in this draft is their front court. I think they'll address it early, of course. We'll get into that later. But I also think they'll double down on it here by going with Jeremy Sochan out of Baylor. At 6'9", I think Sochan would fit perfectly here in that power forward spot. He has the athletic ability to guard all 5 positions, so it gives you some flexibility of how you can kind of use him and move him around. But I think the thing I like about him the most is that he's somewhat raw offensively. But he's shown the ability to create off the dribble. He's shown, he can shoot somewhat from the perimeter, and he has playmaking ability. So in my opinion, I think those are all skills that, being in college, you can't really exercise as much as you'd like, just simply because of you're in the offense, it's structured, things of that nature. But I believe that I truly believe that in the event that he does and is able to, hone in those skills, that's going to be crazy with him at the 4, Shai at the 1. You have essentially 3 with the guy we're going to talk about later, 4 playmakers on the floor at any given position. I guess you could throw Lou Dort in there because he can, create for himself. So to me, that makes that 5 a really interesting 5 that they can grow together. Coming in at pick 11, we have none other than the New York Knicks. This team, in my opinion, should be reconstructed entirely, but this isn't 2K, and that's obviously easier said than done. But you have to start somewhere, and I believe hitting on this pick obviously would be a step in the right direction. The Knicks have some solid pieces, but also I feel like they have a lot of questions. Is Mitchell Robinson coming back? Is Julius Randle going to be traded? Where are we going? What is the direction of this team? And I don't think you can really, decide that until you figure that out. And honestly, to me, that's why it made it tough to find the right guy for this spot. I mean, if you look at the roster, clearly the young talent is there. I mean, they have Quickly, they have Barrett. If you want to even throw in Obi Toppin and Cam Reddish and Quentin Grimes, who all showed flashes at times. With that said, I think where the most need here is on this team is at the PG position. I don't think the Knicks have a true point guard. As we know, the Kemba experiment didn't go as planned. So that leaves the Knicks with really no true point guard. Like no guy who's going to get you in your offense and get you settled and all that kind of stuff. I mean, sure you have Alec Burks and sure you have Julius Randle. But do you really, they can get you in the sets, but is that really who you want running your team? Is that your primary ball handler? Is Julius Randle? I personally don't. I wouldn't want that. And not saying that they're bad players. It's just I would prefer to have someone to get them into their spots instead of making them work so hard. So for me, I think the pick here is Johnny Davis from Wisconsin. Davis gives you a solid two-way skill set at the point guard or shooting guard position if you want to say run quickly at the point guard, which is something I can see. Of course, we were privy to his scoring in college and his ability to get to the rim and score in the mid-range. He's not the best outside shooter, but I think in time you can improve on that. But the kicker for me is on the other end. His defense is solid. He's an athletic guard with good length. He can guard multiple guard positions, and he can take he can take whoever the best guard is that night. And I think, when you add those together, that's a perfect complement to RJ and or Quickly in the backcourt. To me, Johnny Davis is the fit here at 11 for the Knicks. Coming in at number 10, we are now here in the top 10. And at 10, we have the Washington Wizards. Now, this is a pick I find interesting strictly just based on their roster. Again, kind of like the Knicks, it was really hard for me to, for different reasons, to figure out what I wanted to do here. But as everyone knows, the main man in DC is Bradley Beal. So any piece that the Wizards would obviously need to complement him. Going down the rest of the roster, you look at Kuzma, Porzingis, KCP, Kuzma and Porzingis give you a solid front court. They can score, but I mean, not necessarily the best defensively, but it's okay. It's solid. I mean, those are 2 really good players. I would take, either one of them on my team. But again, then you have KCP, who can give you some perimeter scoring. Same thing with Kuzma. He's showed he can fill it up as well, which we kind of already knew, but he really blossomed in his role in Washington. Like I said, KCP, he can give you that, but he's just not as consistent as you'd like. And defensively, though, is where I think KCP kind of stands out. Lastly, you have Satoransky, who definitely showed he can facilitate the ball when given the opportunity, but I really just don't think he's the point guard of the future for this team. And that's the position that I'm going to go with. Back-to-back point guards here. I'm going to go with Ty Washington Jr. Now, Ty did go through some struggles and injuries while at UK, but I think he did show enough to warrant this pick. I think his style of play, the up and down, quick with the ball, really can playmate. I think it translates to the NBA because, like I said, he loves to use his speed, he can get into the lane, and he's a tremendous shooter, which I think obviously any team in the NBA would want. All that aside, the ability for him to handle, I think will help the Wizards the most because it'll take a true load off of Bradley Beal. I don't think anybody's worried about Satoransky enough to draw attention away from Bradley Beal. I think Ty Washington can give you enough to worry about to where he can go get you 15, 20 points if if you're leaving him open or worried about Bradley Beal, things of that nature. So, and also I think for Beal to give him a chance to conserve energy, he won't have to work so hard to get to his spots, to get to his, to get buckets. So that's why I think Ty is the pick there at number 10. Moving on to the 9th pick, which is the San Antonio Spurs. Now, the Spurs, it's not, they're not used to being in this position. So it's always interesting to see how their front office, navigates the draft. And their roster is really interesting to me. I know I've said that about a lot of these rosters, but there are a lot of interesting rosters out there, guys. But for starters, we of course know about DeJounte Murray. I talked about him a little bit earlier when I was talking about Shea. DeJounte is probably one of my favorite point guards to watch because he can literally do it all. He can pass, he can shoot, he can score. And granted, he's not the best shooter, and he's maybe not the best overall scorer, but he can get you buckets when needed. He can get to the bucket. On the other side of the floor, he gives you defense as well. And then you add to that Jakob Poeltl, who may or may not be there. I feel like I see him going back. He's a free agent after next season, I believe. So but I feel like I see him going back into the Spurs. He played well for them this past year, basically averaging a 13 and 9, essentially a double-double for the majority of the season that he was playing. So that's great. From there, you got a bunch of young wings, and that's what I really like about this team. They have Devin Vassell, Lonnie Walker, Keldon Johnson, even Josh Richardson over there. And it kind of makes it crowded at the 2 and 3 spots, but I really do like how, their collection of wings. So with that being said, the area on this team I think they can improve is the the 4th spot. I was thinking about the guy I'm about to discuss, and that's Dougie McBuckets, and he's good, and that's who's kind of playing the 4 for him. But I definitely think why not get younger and possibly better if you can, and that's why I think the 9th pick will be. And I hope I'm saying this right. I listened to some pronunciations. Ousmane Dieng out of New Zealand. He's the pick here for me. At 6'10", I just think his ability to be able to take you off the dribble and play make is a coach's dream in the NBA. Like, think about the guys at the top of this draft board. Jabari Smith, 6'10", can play make. Paolo, 6'10", Chet, 7 foot. So big guys, big guards, if you will, or not necessarily guards, but big 4s who can have guard skills is definitely a plus in today's NBA. Not to mention he has the length and fluidity to guard, to me, at least 4 out of 5 positions effectively. I want to see him be able to – I don't know about the center position just yet. I think he can do it personally, but I'd like to just see it first because NBA centers are a lot bigger and stronger than you might find in New Zealand. But I guess the biggest thing for me with him is just developing a more consistent jump shot. If he can do that, I really do think the Spurs will definitely be an interesting team to look out for here in the future. Now, coming in at the 8th pick in this year's draft is the most surprising team from last year's playoffs, the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans have a chance to really accelerate their timeline and go to the next level next season. If you look at their roster as it's presently constructed, they really should be able to compete with anybody when they're healthy. I think Brandon Ingram took a huge step this past season as both a scorer and a facilitator. Not to mention the addition of CJ McCollum, I think has given this team a huge lift and a true vet presence that's like a not necessarily. I mean, to me, CJ is a star. He might not be the superstar. People got the tiers. But he's a true vet star presence that I would love to have on my team. And not to mention, he can score in bunches. He can play make. You can run your offense. With all that being said, of course, we can't forget about the elephant in the room, or should I say the superhuman in the room, that is Zion Williamson, returning after a full year off in what is going to seem to be, from what I can see, a healthy summer. And then when you add that to this roster, also has guys like Herb Jones and Jonas Valanciunas, Larry Nance, Devontae Graham. So it's built to win now. Jose Alvarado came out of nowhere, built to win now. So For me, the one thing that I think the Pelicans are missing is that they can't really shoot it from outside. They ranked 28th last year in three-point shooting, which is just bad, especially in a league where shooting is the thing. So this is why I personally love AJ Griffin to go here at 8. I know this is kind of a different spot. I in some of the mock drafts that I studied and looked at, not a lot of people had him going here, and I thought that was kind of interesting. But I think he fits here well. I think AJ can give the Pelicans an elite shooter that also possesses the length and the tools to be good on the defensive end. Again, Duke fan, had a chance to watch him a lot. I think the only thing about AJ on the defensive end, his feet are a little slow, and he kind of relaxes at times, if you will. But with that being said, those are things I feel like that can be improved on and fixed. So my favorite part of his game is something that he really didn't even show, and this is the part that I think makes it an interesting pick for the Pelicans, is that he's a very good playmaker and shot creator, especially for himself. He can get to his spots. His footwork's incredible. He just didn't have, I guess, a big enough opportunity to show that at Duke, just because obviously you have Paolo, Trevor Keels, all these guys, and he started off the year basically injured. So, and then he went through like a COVID bout. So it was just a lot for him. So I think here at 8, I would go with AJ Griffin, and I think he'd be an amazing pickup for the New Orleans Pelicans.
Hey everyone, it's JD from the Hyman Podcast. Backed by popular demand, I'm excited to let you know that new episodes of the Hyman Podcast will drop every other Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're going to continue the conversations we started last season and keep having those hard conversations. There is so much in store for you this season, and I'm excited to share it with you. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single moment. The Hyman Podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Now, at pick number 7, we have the Portland Trail Blazers. The Blazers are coming off a season in which Dame barely played and CJ was traded away. So this team is pretty interesting. And they're interesting because I can't tell if they're trying to rebuild or contend. As I previously mentioned, Dame will be back this year, so that's a plus. You also have guys like Anthony Simons that took advantage of Dame being out and made huge strides in his game. I really didn't see him turning into the player that he turned into, but it's awesome to watch. He's a great player. I had a chance to watch him in person, and he is flat out amazing. Also, you have guys like Yusuf Nurkic and Josh Hart, who are, I think, obviously two key pieces of the rotation and should help Dame take some of the load off going forward. But overall, I think the Trailblazers need to figure out their vision. What are they doing? Where are they going? In my opinion, it doesn't seem like Dame's leaving, so I think they should just get pieces to complement him and start really making a push to go for, like, obviously a championship. In this draft, to me, that piece is Dyson Daniels. Now, Daniels is a guy who a lot of people may not know about because he is from overseas and he played in the G League for the G League Ignite team. But to me, Dyson Daniels is the pick. He's a big guard at 6'6". Offensively, he can handle the ball. He's a great playmaker. Not the best shooter. He can make the shot, but you're not looking for him to shoot, 5 to 10 threes a game like you are from Dame or something. So, to me, though, I think the most helpful attribute that he'll have is his defensive prowess. I mean, again, he's a big guard, 6'6". He can, with that size and frame, I think he can guard at least 1 through 3 if need be, effectively. And the fact that he plays hard and aggressive too is something I've watched him in the G League a couple games, and he plays so hard and aggressive, and he's already guarded these guys at a pro level. So I think that, to me, is why I think the pick here at 7 should be Dyson Daniels. Moving on to the 6th pick, we have another team with a somewhat confusing vision, and that is the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers made some moves last season, getting rid of Sabonis and bringing in Tyrese Halliburton and Buddy Hield, which I think are two lovely pickups for them. Rounding out that roster, you have Malcolm Brogdon, who I think has been very, very steady and solid at the point guard position when he's been healthy. You then, of course, have Miles Turner, who is in trade talks every single day. Honestly, you could throw Buddy Hield into that category as well. It's honestly just quite funny to me. Not to mention you have these guys plus Chris Duarte, who creates a solid group of young pieces for the Pacers. Now, with that being said, to me, I really just think Pacers should just go best available here. I don't really see a not necessarily a need, but a perfect match for what they need. So, in perfect NBA fashion, what do you do when you can't find a perfect match? You of course just take a wing. So, this is why I personally like Benedict Mathurin here. He will give the Pacers lights out shooting, so another shooting wing, but he can also handle the ball, so he'll give Tyrese Halliburton, Malcolm Brogdon, he can give you some playmaking ability off the ball, let those guys kind of either sit or, play alongside him and get to their spots and not work as hard. He's also a strong finisher as well. We've seen him dunk on people, all kind of stuff. So definitely very strong and athletic. The key here is if he can play defense on a regular basis, I think this is a really solid pickup for Indiana. And like I said, I feel like they're definitely in that stage where it's like, teams rebuild and they start from scratch and they get to that mid-tier level of rebuilding, I guess, in that middle stage. I think that's where they're at. They're not contending, but they're also not trying to lose games. So solid pick there for Indiana at 6. Now we enter the top 5. And with the 5th pick, we have the Detroit Pistons. Now, this team is loaded with young talent who loves to compete. And that's my favorite part of this roster because any young guy that steps in here will feed off that culture. Looking at their roster, you of course start with Cade Cunningham. As a rookie, 17, 5-5, and you could definitely tell he got his footing as the year went on. Moving down the roster, you have Saddiq Bey, who showed flashes of greatness, including a 50-burger last year. The Pistons also have a solid young rotation of players like Isaiah Stewart, Marvin Bagley, Killian Hayes, Frank Jackson. I could name, keep going. But right now, I think the biggest question about this roster is whether they will trade Jeremy Grant. I personally think they will, which is why I think the pick here is very simple. Keegan Murray out of Iowa. At 6'8", Murray is the same exact size, I believe, as Jeremy Grant. I believe Jeremy Grant's 6'8" as well. But he's a very solid defender who can use his brain and his length to get to his spots where his maybe lack of athleticism, if you will, not great explosion, doesn't have great explosion athleticism, but his brain and his length, his IQ helps him get to spots and be solid on the defensive end. Offensively, he's very, very skilled, and we saw that over the course of last season, especially in the tournament. And personally, the reason I love him in this spot is because he's older. He kind of gives me that Malcolm Brogdon feel, if you will. Like Malcolm Brogdon plays like that old school game. And I'm not saying Keegan Murray has like an old school game, but it's just more thought through, slow, methodical. They're not trying to do all the shake and bake. It's just like, how can we get the ball in the bucket? And that's why I personally I like that. He's older because he's polished, if you will. Or not necessarily fully polished. He's 22 still, but he's polished enough. So at the 5th pick, I'm going with Keegan Murray from Iowa. Now, at number 4, we have quite possibly the most frustrating franchise in all of sports. Yeah, you guessed it, the Sacramento Kings. The Kings are clearly in win-now mode, but I feel like only they believe that. No one else, I feel like, believes the Kings are in win-now mode in terms of, like, they can actually win now. When you look at their roster, they definitely have some talented guys, but I just really don't see the direction they're going. I mean, for starters, they made a mind-boggling trade for Sabonis because they, again, believe they're in win-now mode, which it's not a bad trade. I just don't understand why you trade someone who actually wanted to be in Sacramento like Tyrese Halliburton. That just doesn't really make sense to me. Now, their backcourt is kind of crowded. It has Fox and Mitchell. DiVincenzo, I guess you can even say, is part of that backcourt. It's, add to the fact that when you traded away Halliburton, Fox's production shot up. So it makes it kind of hard for me to see them drafting another guard here, right? Now, with that being said, I do think the Kings should just go best available here because they need all the help and assets they can get. And if you're in win-now mode, you kind of want assets, not even necessarily to play, but you can trade away, get better players, more picks, whatever you may need. So that's why I'm going with Jaden Ivey here in the 4th spot to go to the Kings. I mean, obviously, Ivey flat-out scorer. He can get his shot off anytime he wants, whether it's driving to the bucket, pulling up for 3. You always have confidence that when the ball leaves his hand, it's going in. Now, I don't think the thing that I like about him, if he is to be drafted by the Kings and stay with the Kings, is he's not just a one-dimensional guy. Obviously, he possesses the ability for playmaking. We kind of saw that in the tournament a little bit when he was not necessarily forced, but he was playing point guard and was more on the ball. But the biggest thing to me overall is just his athletic ability. I think he reminds me somewhat of like a Ja or Russell Westbrook, maybe not as explosive, but he's just as athletic. I think this, honestly, all that package together could make him a very solid defender at the next level as well. So the Kings, I don't think they would miss if they picked Jaden Ivey, whether they wanted to trade him or keep him. I don't think they'd miss with him. Now we're into the fun part. You know the 3 names that we're about to discuss. You've heard them all year long. But where are they going to go? How are they going to fall? Well, let's start with pick 3, and that is the Houston Rockets. So, as I said, we're at the coveted top 3. It's the Houston Rockets. By far my favorite roster in the NBA right now. With all the young talent they have, honestly, the 2K GM in me is salivating over this franchise that I'm about to start. But for starters, I mean, obviously you have the dynamic backcourt in Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. They may struggle at times on defense, but they more than make up for it by filling it up on the offensive end of the floor. And not to mention Jalen Green, obviously he's a very athletic guard, but he's really starting to take pride in playing defense as well. And I think that'll honestly just go through the team. I think eventually all those guys will really want to turn it up a notch. Moving down the roster, you have guys like Kenyon Martin Jr. and Jae'Sean Tate, who have turned into solid role players for him. This past week, we saw Christian Wood get dealt to Dallas, which paves the way for one of my favorite players in the NBA to step in that center spot, and that's my boy Sengun. I think he'll take a step this year after kind of acclimating himself to the NBA, getting used to it. I mean, he played pro over in Turkey, so he's been playing professionally for a good little bit, but I think that obviously the NBA is different, so acclimating to it and getting used to it, I think he'll show out. So that leaves one spot open, and it's on the front line. And that spot will be going to the guy that I think is the best player in this draft, and that's Paolo Banchero. Paolo showed us how dominant he could be at Duke, both inside and outside. At 6'10", and I think he's actually, they measured him taller than that. I think he's 6'10", almost 6'11" without shoes on. So imagine he's a 7-footer basically during the game. He can handle the ball like a guard. He has great playmaking ability. The thing I love the most about him is that he has so much confidence in his game. And that's why I think his shot will be drastically improved at the next level with the spacing and all the things that come with that. So I personally love this pick for the Rockets. I think that it just adds to their young core. I love what they're going to try to do in terms of, on the offensive end. You literally have 5 guys that can get you a bucket at any time. Obviously, they're going to struggle a little bit defensively, but I think you can find enough supplemental pieces around that to kind of alleviate that, if that is the case. Now, the second pick, I feel like it's kind of obvious. I kind of gave it away earlier. And some of you, I'm sure, have already guessed based on that first pick. But yeah, we're going back to OKC. This time, we're going to fill in the center spot, though, and we're going to talk about that unicorn, Chet Holmgren. Chet is truly an anomaly. He's the definition for me of potential. Like when someone says the NBA drafts on potential, that is what I see in Chet. Right now, we know that he should definitely give you rim protection, though, regardless of what part of his games translate. that rim protection and the ability to force tough shots on perimeter and kind of stick with perimeter guards and make them shoot over him is what he's definitely going to give you. Because all that takes is effort. Now, I also believe that his shooting, personally, I believe that his traits will transfer. I don't necessarily know if it'll be as drastic as, say, video games may make it or a lot of people may think, but I do think they'll translate, especially his shooting ability. I think the ability for him to handle will turn into him handling to get into his spots within the post. Because that's something where he is kind of weaker at, and just because of his frame, is that's posting up, getting into his spot, that kind of deal. So I think he'll be able to handle that by using his dribble a little bit. As I just said, the biggest thing for me with Chet is mainly just him gaining weight. I think everyone in the NBA obviously is stronger, bigger, faster than they are in college and high school. So for him, Chet just needs to put on weight. And I think if he can do that and just continue to hone his skills and become more comfortable in his body, and sky's the limit for Chet. I mean, sky's the limit. So to round out my NBA mock draft, we will finish with a team with the number 1 pick, and that is the Orlando Magic. Orlando is another team with a crazy stable of young talent. From Cole Anthony to Jalen Suggs to Wendell Carter, Chuma Okeke, the Magic have done a good job at grabbing talented players. It just hasn't translated to wins yet, mainly because they're young, still developing, all that jazz. So personally, I think they're going to turn it around here soon. At least I hope. It's the Magic. You never know. But it's clear to me, though, that the pick here will probably be Jabari Smith Jr. And that makes perfect sense to me. Jabari is an NBA-ready wing right now, like today. He was an NBA-ready wing when he left high school, personally. But obviously, the years at Auburn help. But his ability to shoot is arguably the best in the draft. Not to mention he can get that knockdown shot off anywhere on the court because he's 6'10", and he's super athletic. He jumps so high on his jump shot. And so that's why I think he's going to be a great scorer once he figures the game out in the NBA. The thing I like most about him, though, as you can see, is probably a trend, is he loves to win, which for me is code for the man plays defense. Again, at 6'10", he can guard every single position on the floor. I think if the Magic can develop him alongside that young core, that they're going to be dangerous in a few years. They would remind me of kind of like the Thunder, if you will, when they had Harden, KD, and Westbrook, and Ibaka, and Jeff Green, and not in the fact that they're that talented, but in the fact that all of that young talent was in one spot at one time, growing together. Even Steven Adams, you throw him in there, growing together. And so I think if the Magic can do that, they have enough pieces where it'll be successful. So that is the show for today. Again, thank you for tuning in to listen to me rant and ramble about, I guess, NBA basketball today with some college players. So, again, thank you. I hope you like my mock draft. If not, please shout me out on Twitter. Tell me what I did wrong. Tell me who's in the wrong spot and why. Especially you Cleveland fans. If you think I got the 14th pick wrong, please let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So, without further ado, I'm signing off. This is the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast here on Press Play Podcast Networks. Thank you for listening. Peace.